On a stormy afternoon of October 15th, 2024, at the sprawling Blackwell estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, 12-year-old Marcus Johnson, who helped his grandmother clean wealthy homes after school, witnessed something that changed multiple lives forever. Through sheets of relentless rain and across the expanse of manicured lawn, he spotted Thomas Blackwell, the reclusive, non-verbal son of tech billionaire Richard Blackwell, struggling desperately as his wheelchair sank into rain-soaked mud near the estate's pond. The air crackled with tension, security cameras swiveled, the mud made sickening sucking sounds as the terrified boy's wheels sank deeper. Without hesitation, Marcus abandoned his grandmother's cleaning cart and raced across the forbidden private gardens, performing the most unthinkable act ever witnessed on the heavily guarded estate. His hands flew into signs that the isolated boy understood, creating the first real communication the Blackwell heir had experienced in months. This is the story of how two boys from entirely different worlds forged a connection that would ultimately transform a corporate empire. Subscribe now to discover how one brave moment of understanding can topple the tallest walls of privilege. The rain pounded against the windows of Blackwell Estate like thousands of impatient fingers demanding entry. Marcus Johnson followed his grandmother through the service entrance, staying close behind her industrial cleaning cart. At 12 years old, he was already familiar with the unspoken rules of invisibility that governed helpers in homes like this one. Keep your eyes down. Speak only when spoken to. Move like a shadow. Exist, but not too much. Remember, Marcus, Grandma Esther whispered as they passed beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than their entire apartment building. We are here to work, not gawk. Mr. Blackwell is entertaining important business associates today, so we need to be extra careful. Marcus nodded, though his eyes couldn't help but wander across marble floors that stretched like frozen lakes and walls adorned with artwork that probably belonged in museums. The Blackwell estate wasn't just a house, it was a fortress of wealth, a 30-room mansion nestled on 20 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, complete with a hedge maze, tennis courts, and a private lake. Richard Blackwell, tech billionaire, venture capitalist, and one of the 50 wealthiest people in America, had built his empire from nothing, or so the stories said. His face graced magazine covers, his name dominated financial news, and his reputation for ruthless business tactics preceded him like a shadow. Marcus had seen him exactly once in the 3 months his grandmother had been cleaning here, a tall figure with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they beheld. You take the East Wing bathrooms, Grandma Esther instructed, handing him a caddy of supplies. I'll handle the main areas. Remember, I know, Grandma, be invisible. Marcus took the caddy, already mapping the route in his mind. The East Wing meant he would pass by the room that the other cleaners whispered about, the room where the Blackwell heir was kept. Thomas Blackwell, 10 years old, non-verbal, rarely seen. Marcus had caught glimpses through half-open doors, a small figure in a wheelchair surrounded by therapists, tutors and nurses who cycled through the household with alarming frequency. Nobody lasted long in Thomas's service. The whispers among the household staff painted a picture of a difficult, frustrated child, prone to outbursts that no one understood. What the whispers didn't know, what nobody in the Blackwell household had bothered to discover, was that Marcus understood more than most. His cousin Zoe had been born deaf, and their entire family had learned American Sign Language to communicate with her. For years, Sunday dinners and family gatherings had flowed with 2 languages, spoken words and flying hands, neither more important than the other. Marcus made his way through the East Wing, pushing his cleaning cart past closed doors and hushed rooms. The storm outside was intensifying, rain lashing against floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the grey, angry sky. Thunder rumbled, and lightning occasionally illuminated the darkened landscape. As he approached the bathroom nearest to Thomas's suite, a flash of movement caught his eye through the window. Despite the downpour, someone was outside. Marcus pressed his face to the glass, squinting through the rain. Near the ornamental pond that bordered the formal gardens, a small figure in a wheelchair was struggling. Thomas Blackwell, dressed in an expensive sweater and slacks, was stuck. The rain-softened ground had given way beneath his wheels, and one side of his chair had sunk into the mud. The boy was rocking desperately, trying to free himself, but each movement only seemed to embed the chair deeper. Marcus glanced down the hallway. No staff in sight, no security, no one watching. Outside, Thomas's movements were becoming more frantic. Without thinking, Marcus abandoned his cleaning cart and ran. He took the service stairs 2 at a time, burst through the kitchen where staff were busy preparing for Mr. Blackwell's business dinner, and slipped out the side door into the pouring rain. The cold water shocked his system as he sprinted across the immaculate lawn. He wasn't supposed to be outside. Cleaning staff were explicitly forbidden from entering the grounds. Grandma would lose her job if anyone saw him, but none of that mattered because the Blackwell boy was sinking deeper, and his silent struggle tore at something in Marcus's chest. "Hey!" Marcus called as he approached, but Thomas didn't look up. His focus was entirely on the wheels, his hands pushing uselessly against them as they spun in the mud. His face was a mask of frustration and fear, eyes wide, lips pressed together. Marcus skidded to a stop beside the chair, his sneakers immediately sinking into the same mud that had trapped Thomas. "I can help," he said. But the boy still didn't respond or look at him, and then Marcus understood. Without hesitation, his hands began to move. "Are you okay?" He signed, the familiar shapes flowing naturally. Thomas Blackwell's head snapped up. His eyes, startlingly blue and intelligent, locked onto Marcus's hands, then his face. Shock replaced fear, and his own hands lifted instinctively. "Stuck," Thomas signed back, his movements precise despite his obvious distress. "Help me." The simple exchange sent a jolt through Marcus. He signed again. "I'm Marcus, I'll get you out," while positioning himself behind the wheelchair to push. "Marcus," Thomas signed, his name taking shape in the other boy's hands. "Thank you." It took 5 minutes of maneuvering, pushing and pulling through the sucking mud, but they eventually freed the wheelchair. Both boys were soaked to the skin and covered in mud by the time they reached the paved garden path. Rain still poured down around them, plastering their hair to their heads and running in rivulets down their faces. "How do you know signs?" Thomas asked, his hands moving rapidly now, excitement overriding his previous distress. "My cousin is deaf," Marcus signed back. "We all learned to talk with her." Thomas's face transformed. The solemn, withdrawn expression that seemed permanently etched into his features gave way to something lighter. "No one here knows how," he signed. "They try to make me talk or use the tablet, but I hate the tablet. Words get stuck in my throat." Before Marcus could respond, a shout cut through the rain. Mrs. Peterson, the household manager, was running toward them from the house, her face a thundercloud of fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, grabbing Marcus by the arm. "You know cleaning staff are not permitted on the grounds. And look at the young master, he's filthy." "He was stuck," Marcus tried to explain. "His wheelchair was in the mud by the pond. I saw from the window and—" "That is not your concern," Mrs. Peterson hissed. "Your grandmother will be—" Her tirade was interrupted by Thomas's hands moving frantically between them. The boy's face had shifted from openness back to frustration, his eyes darting between Marcus and Mrs. Peterson. "What is he doing?" Mrs. Peterson demanded, her grip on Marcus's arm tightening. "He's talking," Marcus said quietly. "He's using sign language." "Nonsense, Master Thomas uses his communication tablet." "He's saying he was stuck and scared and I helped him," Marcus translated, watching Thomas's increasingly agitated signing. "He's saying he wants me to stay." Mrs. Peterson's lips thinned to a tight line. "Master Thomas needs to go inside and change immediately. He'll catch pneumonia out here. As for you, your grandmother will be informed of this incident." She released Marcus's arm to take control of Thomas's wheelchair, but the boy twisted away from her grasp, his hands still moving. "Don't send him away," Marcus translated, his voice growing stronger. "He understands me." Mrs. Peterson looked from Thomas to Marcus, uncertainty replacing her anger. "This is highly irregular," she said finally. "Come along, both of you. We need to get Master Thomas inside and cleaned up before his father sees him like this." As they walked toward the house, Thomas twisted in his chair to keep his hands visible to Marcus. "Don't go," he signed desperately. "Please don't go." "I won't," Marcus signed back, ignoring Mrs. Peterson's suspicious glance. "I promise." Inside, the household erupted into controlled chaos. Staff materialized to whisk Thomas away to be cleaned and changed. Grandma Esther was summoned from her cleaning duties, her face ashen when she saw Marcus dripping mud across the immaculate foyer. "What were you thinking?" she whispered, distress evident in every line of her body. "We need this job, Marcus." "I'm sorry, Grandma." "But he needed help," Marcus explained quietly. "He was stuck in the mud, and no one was watching him." Mrs. Peterson returned before Grandma Esther could respond. Her expression was unreadable as she addressed them both. "Mrs. Johnson, your grandson's actions today were completely inappropriate." Grandma Esther's shoulders slumped. "I understand, Mrs. Peterson. It won't happen again. If you'll allow us to finish today's work, we'll—" "However," Mrs. Peterson continued as though she hadn't spoken, "Master Thomas seems to have responded to him in a way we haven't seen before." She turned her calculating gaze to Marcus. "You claim you can understand his hand movements, this sign language?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied. "My cousin Zoe is deaf. We use American Sign Language at home." Mrs. Peterson seemed to be weighing something in her mind. "Master Thomas has resisted all attempts at conventional speech therapy. His communication tablet remains largely unused. His father has hired 4 specialists in the past year alone, none of whom made significant progress." She paused. "I need to consult with Mr. Blackwell." She disappeared down a hallway, leaving Marcus and his grandmother standing awkwardly in the foyer, water still dripping from Marcus's clothes. "What exactly happened out there?" Grandma Esther asked quietly. "Thomas knows sign language, Grandma," Marcus explained, excitement creeping into his voice despite his bedraggled state. "Really well, but nobody here knows it. He's been trying to communicate, but no one understands." Grandma Esther's expression softened. "That poor child," she murmured. Then, more firmly, "But Marcus, you can't just run off like that. Rules exist for a reason, especially in a place like this." "I know, but—" The sharp click of expensive shoes on marble interrupted him. Both Marcus and his grandmother fell silent as Richard Blackwell himself strode into the foyer. In person, he was even more imposing than he appeared in magazine photos, tall and broad-shouldered, with penetrating grey eyes set in a face that rarely smiled. His custom suit probably cost more than a year of Grandma Esther's salary. "You're the boy," he stated, eyes fixing on Marcus with laser focus. "The one who was with my son." Marcus straightened his spine despite the mud and water ruining his only good pair of sneakers. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Peterson tells me you can communicate with Thomas using hand signals." "Sign language," Marcus corrected automatically, then added, "Sir, American Sign Language. Thomas is really good at it." Something flickered across Richard Blackwell's face, surprise perhaps or disbelief. Thomas has never demonstrated any proficiency in sign language with his therapists or tutors. "Maybe they weren't using the right signs," Marcus suggested, "or maybe he didn't want to talk to them." A disapproving murmur ran through the staff who had gathered at the edges of the foyer, but Richard Blackwell raised a hand, silencing them. "I want to see this for myself," he declared. "Mrs. Peterson, have Thomas brought to the study." His gaze returned to Marcus. "You'll come with me." "Sir." Grandma Esther stepped forward tentatively. "Marcus is supposed to help me finish the cleaning schedule, and he needs to change out of these wet clothes." "Your grandson will be compensated for his time, Mrs. Johnson," Richard cut in, "and we can provide dry clothes." It wasn't really a request, and everyone knew it. Marcus looked at his grandmother, who gave him a small nod of resignation. A staff member was dispatched to find dry clothes in Marcus's size, while Richard Blackwell turned and walked away, clearly expecting Marcus to follow. The billionaire's study was exactly what Marcus had imagined: dark wood, leather-bound books, and a massive desk that made visitors feel small and insignificant. Marcus stood dripping on the expensive carpet until a staff member arrived with a Blackwell Industries sweatshirt and sweatpants that were slightly too big but blessedly dry. "Change in there," Richard indicated a small bathroom adjoining the study. "Be quick." When Marcus emerged in the dry clothes, Thomas was already in the room, freshly changed and clean, his wheelchair positioned near his father's desk. The boy's face lit up when he saw Marcus, hands immediately beginning to move. "You came back!" Thomas signed enthusiastically. "They tried to make me use the tablet again, but I told them no. I told them I wanted to talk to you." Marcus smiled and signed back, "I promised I wouldn't go." Richard Blackwell watched this exchange, his expression unreadable. "What is he saying?" he asked. "He's happy I came back," Marcus explained, keeping his signs going so Thomas could follow along. "He doesn't like using the tablet they make him use." Richard's gaze sharpened. "Ask him why he was outside during a storm." Marcus translated the question into sign language. Thomas's face clouded over, and his hands moved more hesitantly. "I wanted to see the baby ducks," Marcus translated. "They hatched last week by the pond. No one would take me outside to see them. The door was unlocked, so I went myself." Richard's jaw tightened. "The door to the garden should never be unlocked," he muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. Thomas continued signing, and Marcus continued translating. The ground was soft. "The wheels got stuck. I tried to call for help, but—" Thomas's hands paused and his eyes dropped to his lap. "But what?" Richard prompted when Marcus fell silent. "But no one would hear him anyway," Marcus finished quietly. "He can't speak out loud and no one was watching." A charged silence filled the study. Richard Blackwell stood perfectly still, his face a mask of controlled emotion. Then he moved to kneel in front of his son's wheelchair, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "Thomas," he said, his voice softer than before, "I didn't know you could communicate this way." Thomas looked at Marcus, who translated Richard's words into sign language. Thomas's hands flew in response. "He says he tried to show his last speech therapist, but she kept making him use the tablet instead," Marcus translated. "He says signing feels natural, but speaking words feels like trying to push rocks through his throat." Richard absorbed this, then asked, "How long have you known how to sign?" After Marcus translated, Thomas's hands moved in a pattern that made Marcus smile. "He says his mom taught him before she died. They used to practice every night before bed," Marcus said softly. "He was 4 years old." Richard Blackwell's composure wavered visibly at the mention of his late wife. He stood abruptly and turned away, facing the window where rain still streamed down the glass. "Mrs. Blackwell passed when Thomas was 4, he said, his back to the room. "There was an accident. I never knew she was teaching him sign language. She never mentioned it." "Maybe she wanted it to be a surprise," Marcus suggested quietly. "My aunt said that's why she didn't tell anyone when Zoe first started signing. She wanted to see our faces when Zoe could suddenly talk with her hands." Richard turned back, his businesslike demeanor reasserting itself. "You said your cousin is deaf. How long have you known sign language?" "Since I was 5, Marcus replied. "My whole family learned together. We speak English at home, but we sign too, so Zoe doesn't miss anything." Richard nodded as though making a decision. "Mrs. Peterson," he called, and the household manager materialized at the door as if she'd been waiting just outside. "I'd like you to make arrangements for the boy. Marcus, is it? To visit the estate after school 3 times a week. He will spend time with Thomas using this sign language." Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Sir, are you suggesting he be hired as a companion for Master Thomas?" "I'm suggesting nothing. I'm stating what will happen," Richard replied flatly. "Draw up the appropriate paperwork. His grandmother's cleaning service contract will continue as usual. This is a separate arrangement." Thomas's hands were flying again, his face alight with excitement. Marcus couldn't help but grin as he translated. "He wants to know if we can go see the ducks tomorrow if it stops raining." The faintest ghost of a smile touched Richard Blackwell's lips. "We'll see," he said, which Marcus dutifully translated into sign. As Marcus was escorted back to his grandmother, he couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous had just occurred. In the space of an hour, he had gone from invisible cleaning helper to someone with a direct line to the Blackwell heir. His grandmother would be relieved about the extra money, of course, but there was something more important than that. The look on Thomas's face when someone finally understood his hands, that was worth everything. The next afternoon, Marcus returned to Blackwell Estate, this time through the front entrance. The storm had passed, leaving the grounds washed clean and glistening in autumn sunlight. "Mrs. Peterson met him with a clipboard of paperwork and a stern expression. Mr. Blackwell has authorized you to spend 2 hours with Master Thomas, 3 afternoons per week, she informed him, handing over an ID badge with his picture already printed on it. You are to remain on the premises at all times. You will be compensated at the rate outlined in this contract, which your grandmother has already reviewed and signed. She hesitated, then added, Master Thomas has been different. Since yesterday, more animated, less resistant to his morning routines. Her tone softened slightly. Whatever you did, it meant something to him. Marcus nodded, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the butterflies in his stomach. Where should I meet him? He's waiting in the garden room. He insisted on being ready early. The garden room turned out to be a glass-enclosed solarium filled with exotic plants and comfortable furniture. Thomas was positioned near the windows, dressed in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. His wheelchair impeccably clean, no sign of yesterday's mud adventure. When he saw Marcus, his serious expression transformed into a wide smile, and his hands began moving immediately. You came, he signed excitedly. I told them you would, but Mrs. Peterson said you might change your mind. I promised, didn't I? Marcus signed back, settling into a chair across from him. How are you feeling today? Better now, Thomas signed. No one understood me after you left. They went back to the tablet. His expression clouded briefly, then brightened. But Father said you're going to come 3 days every week. That's right, Marcus confirmed. We can talk as much as you want. Thomas's hands flew with growing excitement. Can we go see the ducks? I asked Nurse Davis and she said we need Father's permission, but he's in meetings all day. Marcus hesitated. After yesterday's mud incident, he wasn't sure venturing outside was the best first activity. Maybe we should stay inside today, he signed. We could get to know each other better. I want to learn what you like to do. Thomas considered this, then nodded. Okay, but someday we'll see the ducks. Definitely, Marcus promised. Tell me about what you like to do here. Over the next hour, Marcus learned that Thomas was incredibly smart and painfully isolated. He had private tutors who came to the house. Thomas signed that he was too disruptive for regular school. He loved animals, science, and drawing. He hated the endless parade of therapists who tried to fix his nonverbal status and the security staff who watched him like he might break at any moment. What about your dad? Marcus signed, curious about the relationship between the reserved billionaire and his son. Thomas's hands stilled for a moment. Father is busy, he finally signed. He runs Blackwell Industries. It's very important. But what's he like with you? Marcus pressed gently. Thomas looked down at his hands. He tries, he signed slowly. But he doesn't know how to talk to me. He lets the specialists make decisions. They think I don't understand things. But you understand everything, Marcus signed, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Yes, Thomas signed emphatically. I hear everything. I understand everything. I just can't push the words out of my mouth. His hands formed shapes that conveyed profound frustration. My brain knows what to say, but my mouth won't cooperate, Marcus nodded. My cousin Zoe feels the same way about speaking. She can read lips really well and she knows what she wants to say, but the sounds don't work for her. Exactly, Thomas signed, his face lighting up at being understood. That's exactly it. Can I meet your cousin sometime? I'd like that, Marcus signed, smiling. She's in high school now, but she still comes over for Sunday dinner every week. Their conversation flowed easily after that, hands flying in animated discussion about everything from favorite animals to the best superhero movies. Marcus was amazed at Thomas's vocabulary and expressive signing, far more advanced than most hearing people who learned ASL as a second language. It was clear that Thomas and his mother had practiced extensively before her death. Near the end of their session, the garden room door opened and Richard Blackwell himself entered. He looked slightly out of place in his own home, like a visitor who wasn't quite sure of the protocol. Thomas's hands immediately stilled and his expression became more guarded. How is everything going? Richard asked, addressing Marcus rather than his son. Great, sir, Marcus replied, automatically signing as he spoke so Thomas could follow. We've been getting to know each other. Richard watched the sign translation with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been regret. Thomas seems comfortable with this method of communication, he observed. "He's really good at it," Marcus agreed. "He has a big vocabulary." Richard nodded absently, then addressed his son directly. "Thomas, I wanted to let you know that I've cancelled your appointment with Dr. Winters tomorrow." Marcus translated this into sign language, and Thomas's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Dr. Winters is his speech pathologist," Richard explained to Marcus. "In light of recent developments, I'm reconsidering our approach." He paused. "I've also asked Mrs. Peterson to look into sign language instructors for the household staff." Thomas's hands moved so quickly that Marcus had to concentrate to keep up. "Really? The staff will learn to sign? All of them?" When Marcus translated, Richard nodded. "It may take time, but yes, that's the plan." The pure joy that spread across Thomas's face was so powerful that even Richard seemed taken aback by it. The boy's hands shaped one more phrase that Marcus translated softly. "Thank you, Father." Richard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional moment. "Yes, well, it's a practical solution." He straightened his already perfect tie. "I have another meeting. Marcus, Mrs. Peterson will see you out when your session is complete." After he left, Thomas's hands were still for a long moment. Then he signed, "That's the first time he's changed anything about my schedule in 2 years." "That's good, right?" Marcus signed back. "Yes," Thomas replied, a small smile playing at his lips. "It's very good." Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Marcus visited Blackwell Estate every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoon. He and Thomas explored the mansion's many rooms, communicated through increasingly rapid sign conversations, and gradually ventured outside when weather permitted. True to his word, Richard had initiated sign language training for key household staff, starting with Thomas's primary nurse and Mrs. Peterson herself. The change in Thomas was remarkable. The withdrawn, frustrated boy who had been trapped in mud that first day was giving way to a curious, engaged child who had opinions, jokes, and dreams that he could finally express. He still used his communication tablet with staff, who didn't yet know sign language, but his preference was clear. His hands moved with a fluidity and expression that no digital device could match. During their 3rd week together, Marcus arrived to find Thomas waiting in the front hall with a backpack attached to his wheelchair and an expectant expression on his face. "Today we're going on an adventure," Thomas signed as soon as Marcus walked in. "What kind of adventure?" Marcus signed back, intrigued by the unusual setup. "Father said we could go to the duck pond with supervision," Thomas added, nodding toward Mr. Phillips, the head of security, who stood nearby, looking distinctly uncomfortable with his new assignment. "That's great," Marcus signed, genuinely pleased. The duck pond had become something of a forbidden symbol between them, the place where they'd first met, but also the site of Thomas's dangerous misadventure. Mr. Phillips led them outside, maintaining a careful distance that gave the illusion of privacy while keeping Thomas in his sightline. The autumn day was crisp and bright, leaves crunching beneath Marcus's sneakers and Thomas's wheels as they made their way along the paved garden paths. "I've been practicing signs with Nurse Davis," Thomas informed Marcus proudly. "She knows the alphabet now and basic phrases." "That's awesome," Marcus replied. "Is it helping?" "Yes, yesterday I told her my stomach hurt without using the tablet, and she understood right away." The duck pond was smaller than Marcus remembered from that rainy day. A decorative water feature, rather than a proper pond, ringed with ornamental grasses and flat stones. A family of mallards paddled serenely across its surface. Thomas wheeled himself to the edge of the paving stones, a safe distance from any potentially muddy areas. From his backpack, he produced a small container of appropriate duck feed that Nurse Davis had apparently helped him prepare. "Father researched what's safe for ducks to eat," Thomas signed, offering the container to Marcus. "No bread. It's bad for them." They spent a peaceful half-hour watching the ducks, taking turns tossing small handfuls of seed onto the water. Thomas was more animated than Marcus had ever seen him, signing detailed observations about the ducks' behaviors and asking questions about the other wildlife around the estate. As they were preparing to head back to the house, Marcus noticed a dark town car pulling into the circular driveway. Richard Blackwell emerged, accompanied by a woman in a smart business suit carrying a portfolio case. Thomas followed Marcus's gaze, and his hands stilled momentarily. "Father's home early," he signed, surprise evident in his expression. "He has meetings in the city all day." Richard spotted them by the pond and, after a brief word to his companion, changed direction to walk toward them. Mr. Phillips straightened to attention as his employer approached. "Thomas, Marcus," Richard greeted them with a nod. "I see you're enjoying the weather." "We're feeding the ducks," Marcus both said and signed. "Thomas knows a lot about them." Richard glanced at his son. "Is that so?" Thomas's hands moved in response, and Marcus translated, "The bigger one with the green head is the father. He protects the family. The mother raised 7 ducklings this spring, but only 5 survived. 2 were taken by a hawk." Richard looked genuinely surprised. "How do you know all that?" "I watch from my window," came the signed reply through Marcus. "I keep a journal about the animals I see." Something shifted in Richard's expression, a softening perhaps, or a realization. "I didn't know you were interested in wildlife observation," he said carefully. "There's a lot you don't know about me," Thomas signed, his face serious. The blunt translation made Richard blink. He glanced at Marcus, then back at his son. "Perhaps that's true," he acknowledged. "Perhaps that's something we should change." He gestured toward the house. "I've brought someone I'd like you both to meet. Ms. Jenkins is from the Education Department at Gallaudet University. She's here to evaluate our sign language program and make recommendations." Thomas's eyes widened. "Gallaudet? The University for Deaf Students?" Richard nodded. "They have expertise we need. I want to make sure we're implementing the right approaches." He hesitated, then added, "and to discuss educational options that might be more suitable than your current arrangement." The implications of this statement were not lost on any of them. Thomas had been isolated at the estate for years, deemed too disruptive for traditional schooling. The fact that Richard was even considering alternatives represented a seismic shift. As they walked back to the house, Thomas's wheelchair moving smoothly along the paved path, Marcus noticed that the boy kept sneaking glances at his father, as though seeing him in a new light. For his part, Richard maintained his usual reserved demeanor, but there was a thoughtfulness in his expression that hadn't been there before. The meeting with Ms. Jenkins took place in the garden room, which had become Thomas's preferred space. She was a warm, energetic woman who immediately began signing to Thomas, her hands moving with the fluid grace of a native signer. Thomas's face lit up with joy at meeting someone new who could communicate directly with him. His hands flew in response, so quickly that Marcus had trouble following all of it. Miss Jenkins smiled. "Thomas tells me you're the one who discovered he knew sign language," she said to Marcus. "That was quite observant of you." "I just recognized it," Marcus said modestly. "My cousin is deaf, so I grew up signing." "A fortunate coincidence," Miss Jenkins noted, glancing meaningfully at Richard. The evaluation continued for over an hour. Miss Jenkins watched Thomas and Marcus communicate, asked Thomas to demonstrate his vocabulary range, and tested his comprehension of complex concepts expressed through sign. Throughout it all, Richard observed silently, his expression unreadable. Finally, Miss Jenkins turned to address the billionaire directly. "Mr. Blackwell, your son has exceptional sign language fluency for someone his age, especially considering he hasn't had regular practice since his mother's passing. His vocabulary, grammar and expressive range are all outstanding." Richard nodded stiffly. "And your recommendations?" "First, I commend your initiative to train your staff. That should continue and expand." Ms. Jenkins was direct but kind in her delivery. "Second, Thomas would benefit enormously from regular interaction with other signing children, both hearing and deaf. Isolation is detrimental to language development, even for such a bright child." "What are you suggesting exactly?" Richard asked. Ms. Jenkins opened her portfolio and removed several brochures. "There are several excellent programs within reasonable distance of your home. The Westbrook School has an integrated program for deaf and hearing students with a strong ASL component. They have experience with children who, like Thomas, are not deaf, but use sign as their primary communication method." Thomas's hands moved quickly, and Marcus translated, "I want to go to a real school, with other kids." Richard looked at his son, really looked at him perhaps for the first time in years. "It would be a significant adjustment," he said cautiously. "I know," Thomas signed, with Marcus translating. "But I'm ready. I'm tired of being alone with just tutors and nurses." "There would be challenges," Richard pointed out. "Other children might not understand. They might be unkind." Thomas's hands formed a response that made Marcus smile as he translated, "I'm tougher than I look, Father, and I won't be alone. I'll have my hands to speak for me. Ms." Jenkins interjected gently, "Children are often more adaptable than we give them credit for, Mr. Blackwell, and the right educational environment can make all the difference." Richard was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from Ms. Jenkins to Marcus and finally resting on Thomas. "I'll consider it," he said finally. "We'll visit these schools and make an informed decision." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Thomas seemed to understand this was as much as he could hope for at the moment. His hands formed a simple, "Thank you." As Miss Jenkins was preparing to leave, she paused beside Marcus. "You've done something remarkable here," she told him quietly. "You built a bridge when no one else even recognized there was a gap to cross." The metaphor stayed with Marcus long after the meeting ended. A bridge. That's what his hands had become between Thomas and the world around him. But bridges went both ways, allowing traffic to flow in either direction. It wasn't just about Thomas being understood. It was about the Blackwell household learning to understand him. The real turning point came 3 weeks later. Marcus arrived for his regular Friday session to find Blackwell Estate in a state of controlled chaos. Staff members moved purposefully through the halls, and there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. "What's happening?" he asked Mrs. Peterson when she met him at the door. "Mr. Blackwell has an important dinner tonight," she explained tersely. "Board members and major investors will be here. Everything must be perfect." She glanced at her watch. "Thomas is in the library. He's been difficult. Today, his father had to speak with him earlier about proper behavior for tonight." Marcus found Thomas in a secluded corner of the massive Blackwell library, his wheelchair positioned facing the window, away from the door. The boy's shoulders were hunched, and he didn't turn when Marcus entered. "Hey," Marcus signed, moving into Thomas's line of sight. "What's going on?" Thomas's hands remained stubbornly still for a moment, before reluctantly forming words. "Father wants me to attend the dinner tonight, with his important business associates. That's good, isn't it?" Marcus asked, confused by Thomas's evident distress. "He wants to include you." "No," Thomas signed, his movements sharp with frustration. "He wants to show me off. Look at my son. He can communicate now, like I'm one of his successful projects." Marcus sat down across from Thomas. "Did he say that?" "Not exactly," Thomas admitted, his signing softening. "But he wants me to use the tablet instead of signing. He says most of the guests won't understand sign language, and it would be more efficient to use text-to-speech." Marcus considered this. "Maybe he's trying to make it easier for you to talk to everyone. Or maybe he's still embarrassed by me," Thomas signed, his young face creased with hurt. "He took me to visit that school last week, the one Ms. Jenkins recommended. I loved it. There were kids who signed and teachers who understood me, but he hasn't mentioned it since. I think he changed his mind." Marcus didn't know what to say. The complexity of the relationship between Thomas and his father was beyond his experience. Instead of offering empty reassurances, he changed the subject. "Want to work on that science project you were telling me about? The one about ecosystem interdependence?" Thomas allowed himself to be distracted, and they spent the next hour discussing his project, with Thomas gradually becoming more animated. By the time Marcus had to leave, the boy seemed in better spirits, though a shadow of worry still lingered in his eyes. "Good luck tonight," Marcus signed as they parted. "Just be yourself, that's more than enough." That night, as Marcus helped his grandmother prepare dinner in their small apartment 15 miles and worlds away from Blackwell Estate, he found himself wondering how Thomas was faring at the important business dinner. Was he using the tablet as his father had requested? Were the guests treating him with respect, or with the awkward pity that so many people displayed toward those who communicated differently? "You're somewhere else tonight," Grandma Esther observed, passing him a plate to dry. "Thinking about your friend at the big house?" "Yeah," Marcus admitted. He had some important dinner with his dad tonight. He was nervous about it. Grandma Esther nodded thoughtfully. "It can't be easy, being that man's son." All that money, but not much warmth that I've ever seen. She glanced at Marcus. You've been good for that boy. Mrs. Peterson mentioned it when I was there yesterday. Said he's like a different child now. He just needed someone to listen, Marcus said, even though he doesn't speak out loud. Sometimes that's all any of us need, Grandma Esther agreed, wiping her hands on her apron. To be heard however we manage to express ourselves. Monday afternoon, Marcus arrived at Blackwell Estate to find an unusual scene. Richard Blackwell's sleek Bentley was parked in the circular driveway, though he was normally at his Manhattan office at this hour. Even more surprising, Thomas was waiting in the foyer, practically bouncing with barely contained excitement. What's going on? Marcus signed as soon as he entered. Father wants to see us both, Thomas signed back, his movements quick and energetic. In his study, right away. Marcus felt a flutter of anxiety. Had something gone wrong at the dinner? Was his position as Thomas's companion being reconsidered? Richard Blackwell was standing by the window when they entered his study, hands clasped behind his back in his characteristic pose. He turned as they entered, his expression uncharacteristically animated. Marcus, Thomas, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing them forward. I have some news I wanted to share with you both. Thomas wheeled himself to his usual spot near his father's desk, and Marcus took the chair beside him. Friday night's dinner was quite illuminating, Richard began, his tone measured but with an undercurrent of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. The board members were impressed with Blackwell Industries' quarterly performance and the new acquisition targets we've identified. He paused, glancing at his son. But that's not what I wanted to discuss with you. Something unexpected happened at that dinner, Thomas. Something important. Thomas looked up at his father, curiosity evident in his expression. Richard continued. As you know, I had asked you to use your communication tablet during the evening, a request you chose to reinterpret. Marcus tensed, wondering if this was leading to a reprimand, but Richard's expression didn't suggest anger. Instead, Richard went on, you used sign language throughout the evening, with Mrs. Peterson interpreting. Initially, I was. He searched for the right word, concerned that this would create confusion among our guests. Thomas's hands moved, and Marcus automatically translated. You were upset with me, Richard conceded with a nod. I was briefly. But then something remarkable happened. His voice took on a note of wonder. People were fascinated. Board members, their spouses, even the catering staff. Everyone was watching your hands, asking questions about sign language, engaging with you directly rather than talking around you, as has happened at previous functions. He moved to sit on the edge of his desk, bringing himself closer to Thomas's eye level. By the end of the evening, Miss Worthington's granddaughter was asking you to teach her signs. Mr. Abernathy's wife mentioned that her nephew is deaf, and she's always wished she could communicate with him better. And our head chef, Mr. Reeves, apparently has been taking night classes in ASL for the past month because, and I quote, young Master Thomas shouldn't have to use a machine to ask for his favorite dessert. Thomas's face had transformed during this recounting, a slow smile spreading across his features. But most importantly, Richard continued, I realized something fundamental that I've been missing. Your hands aren't just a substitute for speech, Thomas. They're your voice, as unique and expressive as any spoken words could be. He cleared his throat, emotion briefly tightening his voice. I've been trying to make you fit into the world as I understand it, when I should have been learning to understand your world. Thomas's hands flew up, signing rapidly. Marcus translated. Does this mean I can go to Westbrook School? The one with the sign language program? Richard smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed his usually stern features. Yes. I've already spoken with the admissions director. You'll start after the winter break, assuming their evaluation goes well, which, given Ms. Jenkins' assessment, I have no doubt it will. Thomas lunged forward in his wheelchair, reaching for his father. Richard bent down and, with only slight awkwardness, embraced his son. Over Thomas's shoulder, his eyes met Marcus's. None of this would have happened without you, Marcus, he said quietly. You saw what all the expensive specialists missed, that Thomas didn't need fixing. He needed understanding. Thomas pulled back from the embrace, his hands moving again. He says there's one more thing he wants, Marcus translated, smiling as he watched the boy's animated signing. He wants me to keep coming to visit, even after he starts at the new school. Richard nodded. I was hoping you'd be willing to continue. Thomas will make new friends at Westbrook, certainly, but your role in his life has been significant. I'd like that, Marcus said simply. Thomas is my friend. The word seemed inadequate for what had developed between them, a connection that had transformed not just Thomas's life but the entire Blackwell household. Friend didn't capture how they had built a bridge together, word by signed word, between worlds that had seemed impossibly distant. There's one other matter, Richard added, returning to his more businesslike tone. I've established a scholarship fund for students interested in sign language interpretation and education, to be administered through my foundation. The first recipient has already been selected. He looked directly at Marcus. Your grandmother tells me you have a particular aptitude for mathematics and science, in addition to your evident facility with languages. Marcus felt a flutter of something like hope in his chest. Yes, sir. I want to study engineering someday, maybe biomedical engineering to design better adaptive technologies. Richard nodded approvingly. The scholarship includes a guaranteed place at Westbrook's middle and high school programs, should the recipient maintain academic standards. Full tuition, books, transportation, everything. His expression softened slightly. Thomas will need allies at his new school, people who already understand his mode of communication. The implication was clear, and so enormous that Marcus could hardly process it. A full scholarship to one of the most prestigious private schools in the state, an opportunity that would have been unimaginable just weeks ago. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell, Marcus managed, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Richard replied. Your actions have spoken volumes already. He glanced at his watch. Now I believe you two have your regular session scheduled. Thomas has been talking non-stop, if you'll pardon the expression, about some science experiment he wants to show you. As they left the study, Thomas couldn't contain his excitement, his hands flying in rapid signs. Did you hear that? We're going to go to school together. And Father actually hugged me. He never does that. It's amazing, Marcus agreed, still dazed by the unexpected turn of events. Everything's changing. Because of you, Thomas signed emphatically. You built the bridge. The phrase echoed Ms. Jenkins' words from weeks earlier. Marcus shook his head. No, we built it together. And your dad is helping now, too. They made their way to Thomas's workspace, where an elaborate ecosystem model was spread across a large table. As Thomas began explaining his project, hands moving expressively in the language that had opened so many doors, Marcus reflected on how quickly life could transform. 6 weeks ago, he had been invisible in this house, just the grandson of a cleaning lady, instructed to keep his eyes down and his presence minimal. Thomas had been trapped in silence, his intelligence and personality hidden behind the walls of communication barriers, and Richard Blackwell had been a distant figure, separated from his son by his inability to hear what wasn't being spoken aloud. Now, bridges were being built in all directions. Thomas would attend a real school with peers who could understand him. Marcus would receive an education he had only dreamed about, and Richard was finally learning to see his son clearly, not as a problem to be solved, but as a complete person with his own unique voice. As Thomas's hands shaped the story of his project, Marcus realized that this was only the beginning. The bridges they were building would lead to places none of them could yet imagine, connecting worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart. But the road ahead would not be without its challenges. 2 weeks before Thomas was scheduled to start at Westbrook School, Marcus arrived at Blackwell Estate to find the household in disarray. Security personnel spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Staff members hurried through corridors with tense expressions. Mrs. Peterson intercepted Marcus at the door, her normally composed demeanor cracked with worry. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, guiding him quickly toward Richard Blackwell's study. "There's been an incident." "Is Thomas okay?" Marcus asked, his heart hammering. "What happened?" "He's physically unharmed," Mrs. Peterson assured him, "but extremely distressed. Mr. Blackwell is with him now." The study door was ajar, and Marcus could hear Richard's voice. unusually gentle but strained with concern. When they entered, Marcus saw Thomas curled in his wheelchair, knees drawn up to his chest, face buried in his arms. Richard knelt beside him, one hand awkwardly patting his son's shoulder, his expression a mixture of helplessness and simmering anger. He looked up when Marcus entered. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing. "Thomas has refused to communicate with anyone for the past 2 hours, not even by tablet." Marcus approached carefully, kneeling where Thomas could see his hands. "Hey," he signed. "I'm here. What's wrong?" For several long moments Thomas remained motionless. Then slowly he lifted his head. His eyes were red from crying, his face blotchy. His hands trembled as they began to form words. "They don't want me," he signed, his movements jagged with emotion. "Who doesn't want you?" Marcus asked, confused. "The parents at Westbrook," Richard interjected, his voice tight. "Or rather, a small but vocal group of them. They've started a petition." "A petition?" Marcus repeated, disbelieving. Richard's jaw clenched. "Expressing concerns about Thomas joining the student body. They claim his special needs would require too many resources, that it would disrupt the learning environment for other students." Thomas's hands moved again, and Marcus translated. "They say I'll scare the other kids, that I might have outbursts, that I'm unpredictable." The injustice of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. After all the progress, after all the bridges built, there were still walls waiting for them. "But that's not fair," Marcus protested. "They don't even know you." "Unfortunately, fairness isn't always the governing principle in these matters," Richard said bitterly. "The Board of Trustees is meeting tomorrow to discuss the situation." Thomas signed again, his movements small and defeated. "Father was on the phone all morning. He yelled. I've never heard him yell like that." Richard ran a hand through his immaculately styled hair, momentarily disheveling it, a small but telling sign of his distress. "I've made it clear to the headmaster that this opposition is unacceptable. Blackwell Industries is a major donor to their endowment fund." "So you'll force them to take him?" Marcus asked, uncertain whether that was a victory or another kind of defeat. Richard's expression darkened. "If necessary, but that's hardly the welcome I want for my son." He looked at Thomas, genuine pain in his eyes. "I want him to be accepted, not merely tolerated." Thomas's hands moved again, and Marcus translated, "I don't want to go anymore, not if they don't want me there." The resignation in those signed words broke something in Marcus. Without thinking, he replied with uncharacteristic fierceness, "No, we're not giving up, not when we've come this far." He turned to Richard. "Mr. Blackwell, forcing them won't work. But maybe they just need to see Thomas the way I did. Maybe they need to understand." Richard studied him thoughtfully. "What are you suggesting?" "A meeting," Marcus replied, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "Not with the board or the headmaster, with the parents and kids themselves. Let them meet Thomas, see him sign, understand who he really is, not whatever they're imagining." Thomas's hands moved tentatively. "They wouldn't listen to me." "They would if they could see you," Marcus insisted, signing as he spoke. "The real you. Not a label or a condition or a problem to be solved, just you." Richard was silent for a long moment, considering. Then he nodded decisively. "I'll arrange it. Not at the school, neutral ground, and not as a confrontation but as an opportunity for understanding." He glanced at his watch. "It will take a day or two to organize." For the first time since Marcus arrived, a spark of hope lit in Thomas's eyes. His hands shaped a question. "Will you be there with me?" "Of course," Marcus signed back. "That's what friends do." 3 days later, Marcus found himself in the community room of the Greenwich Public Library, watching as families filed in. Richard had secured the space for a community dialogue on inclusive education with the cooperation of Ms. Jenkins from Gallaudet, who had brought several colleagues with expertise in educational integration. The atmosphere was tense. Parents whispered to each other, casting curious or skeptical glances toward Thomas, who waited with his father near the podium. Richard had abandoned his usual power suit for a more approachable button-down and slacks. Thomas wore a simple sweater and jeans, his wheelchair positioned where everyone could see him. Marcus sat in the front row with Grandma Esther, who had insisted on coming to support both boys. His cousin Zoe was there too, having eagerly accepted the invitation to help demonstrate what peer-to-peer sign language communication looked like in practice. When everyone was seated, Richard stepped forward. The whispers died away immediately. Even out of his corporate environment, Richard Blackwell commanded attention. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice measured and calm despite the circumstances. "I understand there are concerns about my son Thomas joining the Westbrook community. I believe these concerns stem from misunderstanding, not malice, so I've arranged this meeting in the spirit of open dialogue." He paused, surveying the room. "I could stand here and tell you about Thomas's academic abilities, which are exceptional. I could cite studies on the benefits of integrated education for all students. I could remind you that the Americans with Disabilities Act guarantees my son's right to appropriate education." His voice took on an edge. "Or I could mention that Blackwell Industries Charitable Foundation funds a significant portion of Westbrook's scholarship program." A murmur ran through the assembled parents. Richard raised a hand to quiet them. "But I'm not going to do any of those things," he continued. "Instead, I'm going to step aside and let you meet my son, not as a collection of reports or diagnoses or legal obligations, but as a person, a child, just like your children, with hopes, fears, interests, and a voice that deserves to be heard." He turned to Thomas. "Son, would you like to introduce yourself?" Thomas wheeled himself forward, his face a mixture of nervousness and determination. His hands began to move, with Ms. Jenkins interpreting aloud for those who didn't understand sign language. "My name is Thomas Blackwell," she voiced as his hands flew. "I'm 10 years old. I like science, especially biology and ecosystems. I keep a journal about the ducks that live on our pond. I want to design better wheelchairs when I grow up, ones that don't get stuck in mud." A ripple of surprised laughter broke the tension. Thomas continued, growing more confident. "I know you might be worried about me coming to your school. You might think I'll be disruptive or need too much attention from the teachers. You might be scared because I communicate differently." His hands paused, then resumed with careful, deliberate movements. "The truth is, I'm scared too. I've never been to a regular school before. I don't know what the cafeteria is like, or how to join in games at recess, or what happens if I don't understand an assignment." The room was utterly silent now, every face focused on the small boy whose hands spoke with such eloquence. "But I want to learn these things," Thomas continued through his interpreter. "I want to make friends and do science projects and maybe join the chess club. I want to be a kid at a school, not just a kid in a big, lonely house with tutors." His hands stilled, then formed one more sentence. "I just need a chance to show you who I am." The silence that followed was profound. Then, from the back of the room, a small hand went up. It belonged to a girl about Thomas's age, with braided hair and bright eyes. "I have a question," she said, when Richard acknowledged her. "Do you know any cool science facts about ducks?" Thomas's face lit up, and his hands began to move rapidly. "Ducks have waterproof feathers because they spread oil from a gland near their tail all over their bodies," Ms. Jenkins translated. "And they can sleep with one eye open and one side of their brain awake to watch for predators." "That's actually pretty cool," the girl admitted. Another hand went up, this time from a boy wearing a space-themed t-shirt. "Can you teach us some sign language?" Thomas nodded enthusiastically, and with Marcus and Zoe joining him at the front, they began teaching the room simple signs. Hello, thank you, friend, science. Soon, children were leaving their parents' sides to cluster near Thomas, hands awkwardly copying his movements, faces lighting with accomplishment when they got a sign right. Parents followed more hesitantly, many looking somewhat abashed. One mother approached Richard as the impromptu sign language lesson continued. "Mr. Blackwell," she said quietly, "I was one of those who expressed concerns. I want to apologize. I made assumptions that were clearly wrong." Richard regarded her steadily. "My son isn't defined by what he can't do, but by who he is and what he can do. That's all any of us want for our children, to be seen for their potential, not their limitations." By the end of the evening, the mood had transformed. Children exchanged contact information, Parents discussed carpooling possibilities, and the board members present had huddled in a corner, speaking in low but positive tones. Miss Jenkins approached Marcus as people were beginning to leave. "You've started something remarkable here," she told him. "Not just for Thomas, but potentially for many children. Westbrook could become a model for integration if this goes well." "I just wanted my friend to have a fair chance," Marcus replied simply. "Sometimes that's how the biggest changes begin," she said with a smile. As they were leaving, Thomas rolled up beside Marcus, his face alight with excitement and relief. "Did you see?" he signed. "They liked me. The real me." "Of course they did," Marcus signed back, "because they finally saw you, not just what they imagined." Thomas looked toward his father, who was deep in conversation with the Westbrook headmaster, their body language now cordial and cooperative. "Father was different tonight too," he observed. "Not scary powerful like he usually is with business people, just a dad." Marcus nodded. "He fought for you, not with money or threats, but by showing everyone who you really are." Thomas's expression grew serious. "I'm still nervous about school." "That's normal," Marcus assured him. "Everyone's nervous about new schools, but I'll be there too, remember? We'll figure it out together." The day Thomas Blackwell officially began at Westbrook School dawned clear and cold, a perfect January morning. Marcus, who had transferred 2 weeks earlier, waited anxiously by the school entrance, watching for the now familiar Blackwell town car. When it arrived, Richard emerged first, opening the door himself rather than waiting for the driver. He helped Thomas navigate his wheelchair down the vehicle's built-in ramp, then stood back, straightening his son's jacket with uncharacteristic attention to detail. Thomas spotted Marcus, and his hands immediately began to fly. "I couldn't sleep at all last night. Father said I could skip the welcome ceremony if it's too much, but I want to do everything." Marcus grinned, signing back. "The science lab is amazing. You're going to love it." Richard approached more slowly, his expression a complex mixture of pride and apprehension. "Everything set for today?" he asked Marcus. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "I've shown everyone in our homeroom the welcome signs we practiced, and the adaptive technology specialist set up Thomas's desk yesterday." Richard nodded, then knelt to Thomas's eye level. His hands moved in the signs he'd been practicing diligently over the past month, still slow and somewhat clumsy, but unmistakable in their meaning. "Proud of you," he signed. "Very brave." Thomas's eyes widened. He hadn't expected his father to sign publicly, in front of the school where business associates and social peers might see. His hands flew up to respond, but instead he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around his father's neck in a tight embrace. For a moment, Richard seemed frozen in surprise. Then his arms closed around his son, holding him close, oblivious to the curious glances of passing students and parents. When they separated, Thomas signed something that made Richard's composed expression falter. Marcus, watching, translated silently to himself, "Mom would be proud of you too." Richard stood quickly, clearing his throat. "Well," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual, "I should let you get to class. Marcus, I've got this, Mr. Blackwell," Marcus assured him. "Thomas will be fine." As they made their way into the school building, Thomas glanced back once at his father's tall figure, still watching from the sidewalk. "He's never hugged me at a public place before," Thomas signed, wonder in his expression. "Never." "Things change," Marcus signed back with a smile. People change, and they had, all of them. The silent, isolated boy in the mansion, the reserved, distant father who had buried his emotions in work, the invisible cleaning helper who had crossed boundaries to build a bridge. They had all been transformed by the simple power of being seen and understood. As they entered the classroom, students looked up with interest. A few offered tentative waves. The girl from the library meeting, Sophia, had saved spots for them near the front, and on the board, in large, careful letters, someone had written, "Welcome, Thomas." Beneath it, the teacher had added a simple line that made both boys smile. "Words aren't the only way to speak. Sometimes hands say more." Thomas looked at Marcus, his eyes bright with unshed tears and boundless possibility. His hands shaped 3 simple words: "We made it. Marcus nodded, signing back. This is just the beginning. And it was. In the years that followed, the bridge they had built would extend beyond them, reaching other children, other schools, other communities. Richard Blackwell would establish the nation's largest private foundation dedicated to communication accessibility and inclusive education. Westbrook would become a model program studied by educators nationwide. Grandma Esther would return to school herself, earning a degree in educational support services. But on that winter morning, as two boys from vastly different worlds faced their new beginning together, none of that future was yet visible. All they knew was that they had overcome the barriers of silence, privilege, and misunderstanding to forge a connection that had changed everything. All because, on a rainy afternoon, a boy had seen another boy in trouble and found a way to ask, "Are you okay?" And because, against all odds, he had been understood.